She stood at the door, eyes blazing and one hand on her belly, demanding immediate alimony from her father-in-law. Nicole's tone carried no grief, only threat. Picture the scene. An elderly father, Thomas, already broken by the recent death of his son, confronted on his very doorstep by a furious woman shouting about rights, money, and inheritance. Neighbors watched silently, curious as the tension grew with every word. It is at this exact moment that the story unfolds, revealing a plot of secrets, betrayals, and breathtaking revelations. But what seemed like nothing more than a family scandal would soon turn into a far more dangerous game, where love, loss, and ambition intertwine in devastating ways. Do you want to find out how this confrontation changes everything and just how far Nicole is willing to go? Then subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single detail of this gripping tale. After all, the next step in this story may be even more shocking than you imagine. Thomas Cooper, a 67-year-old man, is the living image of someone who never measured efforts for what he loved most, his son. From early on, life placed him before trials that would have crushed many, but he did not yield. He knew that the absence of his wife would not be an excuse to offer less than the best. Every dawn as he left for work, there was a silent commitment to James, to secure him a worthy future. This dedication was not born from grand speeches but from small and consistent actions. Thomas took on extra jobs, gave up his own pleasures, and endured fatigue only those who live it can understand. It's like that saying, "He who plants with sweat, harvests with pride." And his greatest pride was seeing the boy grow up with integrity. Often, true love shows itself more in silence than in words. Thomas's journey mirrors that of so many fathers and mothers who, in the rush of life, set aside their own desires. It's the driver who takes 2 extra rides to pay for his daughter's course, or the mother who forgoes new clothes to buy school supplies. These stories, though common, hide a daily heroism. They reveal the invisible strength that holds a family together. Thomas carried a certainty in his heart. Raising James was his life's mission. It was not only about teaching math or good manners, but about shaping character. He believed discipline was a gift, not a punishment. The greatest gifts we receive in childhood do not come wrapped in boxes, but in values we carry forever. There is something profoundly inspiring in the way Thomas dealt with loneliness after losing his wife. He did not surrender to despair, nor did he seek easy shortcuts. On the contrary, he turned pain into fuel. It's like when someone decides to use a fall as momentum for a leap. That's how he moved forward, one day at a time. The bond between father and son grew nourished by trust and simplicity. Thomas was the kind of man who, instead of long speeches, preferred example. He showed it in the way he treated neighbors, in how he honored his commitments, in the tired smile he offered even after a hard day. James learned with his eyes, not only with his ears. When people think of education, many believe it all depends on school. Thomas, however, understood that home is the first and greatest classroom. There he passed down values like honesty, respect, and resilience. Values that nowadays are rare coins. Whoever carries them inside rarely loses their way. It is striking to notice how James, still a boy, copied his father's gestures. If Thomas fixed something with improvisation, the boy wanted to learn too. If he read the newspaper, James would come closer, curious. These details reveal the power of example. After all, children don't follow advice, they follow models. And Thomas, without realizing it, was sculpting the future before his very eyes. Time went by, and each of Thomas's sacrifices seemed to turn into small victories. The boy grew up healthy, educated, respectful. The old father swelled with pride, realizing that despite the absence of a mother, multiplied love had been enough. But since life often tests us precisely when we believe we are at peace, a new chapter was about to begin. James, now 27 years old, was starting to drift away from the image of the calm young man his father so admired. He had met Nicole, a 32-year-old woman full of energy, but with habits that clashed with the discipline in which he had been raised. She loved endless parties, excessive drinking, and dragging James into environments that Thomas would never have approved of. The old father watched from a distance, his heart heavy, as if he were watching a boat drift off course into a storm. Conversations at home were no longer the same. Once filled with respect and closeness, they had become short, cold, almost bureaucratic. Thomas noticed that every word he spoke seemed like criticism to his son, who quickly defended himself with aggression. Nicole was always in the background, like a shadow shaping his actions. Little by little, the trust built over decades seemed to crumble. This is a common sight in real life. When someone enters our lives and changes our habits, we often don't notice it right away. Many times, friends and family notice first. That's what was happening with James. He didn't realize that by adopting Nicole's lifestyle, he was abandoning the solid foundation he had inherited from his father. And, as with any structure, when the foundation is shaken, the whole building begins to tremble. Thomas tried to give advice, but his words were taken as judgments. The son, who once followed his father's example, now saw him as an obstacle. It's like when someone offers you a map to avoid getting lost, but stubbornly you insist on ignoring it. Their relationship, once marked by trust, was beginning to erode through small arguments that grew like cracks in a wall. The old father, though hurt, never stopped trying. He sought gentler conversations, offered examples, and even reminded James of past sacrifices to show the value of a disciplined life. But James, blinded by the emotions of passion, preferred to stay silent or pull away. With every night out partying alongside Nicole, Thomas felt he was losing more of the son he had so carefully raised. This kind of conflict is painful because it shows that love alone is not always enough to keep bonds strong. Outside influence can be so powerful that it erases memories and shapes a new identity. James, enchanted by the fleeting glitter of parties, seemed to forget the solidity of the values he had been given. For Thomas, it was like watching a masterpiece being scribbled over in haste. Even in the face of difficulties, the father never stopped believing that time would reveal the truth. He knew that quick pleasures rarely withstand the test of life, but the pain of watching his son drift away was real. It was like holding sand in his hands. The tighter he squeezed, the faster it slipped away. The silence of the house began to weigh heavier than the noise of the parties outside. James, for his part, didn't see the abyss opening between him and his father. Nicole's presence seemed to fill every space, and any advice felt like a threat to his freedom. With each sleepless night for Thomas, the distance between them grew. That bond of closeness between father and son no longer felt the same. And still Thomas remained steadfast. He knew life has harsh ways of teaching, and that sooner or later, reality would come knocking. What he could not have foreseen was that, right in the middle of this conflict, an unexpected event would completely change the course of the story. Life often likes to surprise us precisely when we least expect it. That's what happened with Thomas in Tired Eyes, when he received a visit from a lawyer at his modest home. After years of silent struggle, an old lawsuit had finally come to an end. The amount? $10 million in compensation plus decades of accumulated interest. Money that once seemed like a distant dream was now within his reach. But Thomas's heart did not immediately fill with joy. On the contrary, there was a lump in his throat. He knew his son better than anyone, but he also clearly saw the influence Nicole, the 32-year-old woman with light brown skin and long wavy hair, had over James. His fear was not about the money itself, but about the damage it could cause if it fell into the wrong hands. How could he trust that this fortune wouldn't become fuel for vices and manipulation? The lawyer spoke of figures and documents, while Thomas pondered deeper values. For him, money had always been a consequence, never the goal. He had spent his life teaching his son that true wealth lies in character, honest work, and respect. Now, ironically, fate was handing him a sum that could change lives, but also destroy them. He felt as though he held dynamite in his hands. The scene could be compared to someone who discovers a chest of treasure, but knows they cannot simply open it. Thomas realized that keeping it secret was his only protection. After all, it wasn't just a matter of finances, but of emotional and family survival. Silence, in that moment, was an act of love, even though it weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, James continued to live intensely alongside Nicole. The young black man of 27, with dark brown skin, an athletic build, short hair, and a thin beard, had no idea about the fortune that could one day bear his name. And perhaps it was better that way. Immersed in parties, alcohol, and empty promises, he did not yet have the balance needed to handle such responsibility. Thomas knew that money poorly managed is like water in a sieve. It slips through without leaving a trace. For that reason, he decided to keep the news secret until the right moment. He would safeguard not only the documents, but also the hope that one day James might be ready to inherit not just the sum, but also the weight of what it represented. It is striking how often life tests our ability to keep silent. The old father felt the secret burning inside him, but he believed time would reveal the right path. He thought of Nicole's hands holding glasses at parties, of her suspicious glances, and he knew that any slip could put everything at risk. It was like walking on broken glass. One wrong step and the damage would be irreparable. In the solitude of his home, Thomas looked at the papers that confirmed his legal victory. $10 million were there, represented in cold numbers, but carrying the weight of a lifetime of struggle. The responsibility was even greater now. It was not just about protecting the money, but about safeguarding the legacy he intended to leave. And above all, protecting the memory of the wife who had died giving birth to James. Fate, however, seemed to be preparing something more cruel. For while Thomas guarded the secret, believing he could control the course of events, external forces were already at play. Forces he could not yet imagine, but that would soon place father and son before irreversible choices. James decided to leave his father's house to live with Nicole, the 32-year-old black woman with light brown skin, long wavy hair, a seductive gaze, and an intense personality. The decision struck Thomas like a painful sentence. The 67-year-old black man with dark skin, short gray hair, a neatly trimmed white beard, and weary eyes, watched in silence as his son packed his belongings, his heart heavy. It was as if every piece of clothing taken from the wardrobe also ripped away a piece of his own soul. Thomas did not try to stop him. He knew that the more he pushed, the farther James would drift. But that did not lessen the pain. His modest home, once filled with James's presence, now echoed with unbearable emptiness. The armchair where they used to talk, the plates shared at the table, even the quiet moments in the hallway, all now carried a cruel sense of absence. He realized that sometimes love also means knowing when to remain silent. Tragedy, however, was quick to strike. Only days after leaving, James went out from a party full of alcohol and loud music. The car he was in lost control and crashed violently, turning into a heap of flaming metal. The body found inside was declared unrecognizable, burned beyond recognition, extinguishing even the last fragment of hope for Thomas. The impact was devastating. Thomas, a man who had dedicated every second of his life to his son, felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. It was as if time itself had stopped. He was left with an emptiness that no amount of money or memories could ever fill. His deep eyes, once full of strength, now carried nothing but pain and disbelief. The streets of the city felt different after that. The world went on. People laughed, worked, lived. But for Thomas, everything had lost its color. He remembered the boy he once held in his arms, the young man he had been so proud of. And now there was nothing but searing grief. The silence of his house had become a constant lament. News of the accident spread quickly. Nicole wept in front of the neighbors, but her tears could not touch Thomas's wary heart. Deep down, he knew something about the story didn't add up. Even in mourning, his intuition remained alert. Questions with no answers burned in his mind. Still, the pain was greater than any suspicion. Thomas withdrew. He avoided conversations, refused visits, and spent sleepless nights staring at a photograph of James as a child. Every detail of the image seemed to whisper, "It's not over, Not yet. That silent voice made the old man cling to an almost invisible hope. During that time, the weight of loneliness was so crushing that even the sound of the wind turned into memories. The creaking chair, the ticking clock, everything seemed to echo James's name. Thomas had become a prisoner of memories, while life demanded he move on. But how could he continue without the son who had been his reason to live? And just when it seemed nothing could be worse, new events began to unfold. Life, relentless, was about to reveal that tragedy was not the end of the story, but only the beginning of something much greater. Days after the accident, Nicole, a 32-year-old black woman with light brown skin, long wavy hair, a piercing gaze, and a calculated smile, appeared at Thomas's door. Different from the seductive figure of the parties, she now wore a serious expression, one hand resting on her belly. With a firm voice, she announced she was pregnant with James's child. The news struck like lightning on the already shattered heart of Thomas, a 67-year-old black man with dark skin, short gray hair, and a neatly trimmed white beard. Nicole did not limit herself to sharing the pregnancy. She demanded immediate support, speaking of alimony, rights, and even inheritance. Her tone was more of entitlement than grief, and this sparked the old father's suspicion. Thomas, still mourning the supposed death of his 27-year-old son, a young black man with dark brown skin, athletic build, short hair, and a thin beard, remained calm. He asked her to wait for a DNA test before any decisions. His serenity contrasted with the fury beginning to blaze in her eyes. Thomas's silence was like gasoline on fire. Nicole raised her voice, shouting that she would not be disrespected, hurling insults at him and accusing him of having a heart of stone. The scene caught the attention of the neighbors, who watched the quarrel from the sidewalk. Yet the old father stood his ground, firm in posture, knowing he must not yield to pressure. It was a clash of unequal forces. On one side, the genuine grief of a father. On the other, the manipulation of a woman who seemed more interested in money than in James's memory. Nicole stomped her feet, gestured aggressively, and used the alleged pregnancy as an emotional shield. With every word, Thomas saw more clearly the hidden intentions. Even weakened by loss, the elderly man refused to be shaken. His response was simple but heavy. Only after the DNA confirmation would he assume any responsibility. The restrained coldness in his voice left Nicole furious. It was as if she had lost control of the game she was trying to manipulate. The confrontation did not end with dialogue. It ended with scandal. Nicole, a woman of striking presence, stormed out of the house shouting, accusing Thomas in front of everyone. She played the victim, but her gestures revealed exaggerated theatrics. While neighbors whispered, Thomas slowly closed the door, feeling that something much bigger hid behind the performance. At that moment, Thomas's solitude gained a new ingredient: suspicion. What was once only silent grief now became a battle to protect James's legacy. The supposed grandchild Nicole carried was perhaps nothing more than another piece of a cruel game. The old father returned to his armchair, his hands trembling, eyes fixed on nothing. The memory of James, a 27-year-old black man with dark brown skin and a calm demeanor, mingled with Nicole's calculating face. He felt he was facing a well-crafted lie. Still, he held on to prudence. He would wait for scientific proof before making any move. The silence of that night was unlike any other. It was not just mourning. It was a premonition that the truth was still hidden somewhere, ready to emerge and change everything once again. 5 nights later, Thomas sat alone in his armchair, swallowed by silence. The grief of losing James still consumed him, and every creak in the house echoed like a lament. Then, in the middle of the night, a strange noise at the door made him stir. His heart raced. Could it be a thief? He rose slowly, walking with firm but cautious steps, holding a piece of wood as his only defense. The old father, though weary, still carried the strength of protection. As he approached the entrance, he heard the sound again, followed by a muffled voice. Thomas's body froze when he recognized the familiar tone. A phrase came through the door. "It's me, Dad, it's me." When he opened it, there stood James, a 27-year-old black man with dark brown skin, athletic build, short hair, and a thin beard. The young man's arms were scratched, his clothes dusty, but his tired eyes radiated life. The shock was so immense Thomas could hardly believe it. It was like seeing a ghost materialized, the impossible becoming reality. For a few eternal seconds, they simply stared at each other in silence. Thomas, tears welling in his eyes, hesitated to believe what stood before him. James, still breathless, took a step forward and embraced him tightly. The warmth of that gesture erased all doubt. James was alive. Emotion erupted like a dam breaking, releasing the pain that had weighed so heavily on the old father's heart. The reunion was filled with both relief and confusion. How could James be standing there if everyone believed he had died? Thomas didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or collapse to his knees in gratitude. All he could feel was overwhelming relief at having his son back. Yet beneath that relief, a spark of unease grew. What secrets had this return brought with it? Still catching his breath, James quickly revealed that there was more behind the so-called tragedy. The accident, he explained, had not been mere chance. He had returned not only to comfort his father, but to prepare him for a disturbing revelation. His eyes reflected both fear and determination. Thomas, meanwhile, struggled to organize his thoughts. The memory of recent grief, of Nicole's false pregnancy and her cruel insults, made everything heavier. If James had returned, the old man realized it meant the truth was far from being told. His heart, which until then had carried only mourning, now beat with a mix of hope and apprehension. Having his son back was a miracle, but also a sign that the nightmare was far from over. After all, unexpected returns never come alone. They always carry hidden secrets and truths that can change everything. In that moment, between tears and embraces, father and son realized that the night held more mysteries than answers. The reunion was not the end of sorrow, but the opening of a new chapter, filled with revelations yet to come. James sat before his father, his eyes still red and his body marked with scratches. His voice, though trembling, carried the urgency of someone who needed to release a burden. He revealed that the accident had not been a tragic twist of fate, but a carefully planned trap. The car had been sabotaged, and he himself had set the empty vehicle on fire to simulate his own death. Thomas, a 67-year-old black man with dark skin, short gray hair, and a neatly trimmed white beard, listened in silence, his heart racing. Every word from his son struck like a blow, not only because of the revelation but because it confirmed his instincts. The intuition that had made him suspect Nicole now transformed into certainty. His eyes, once blurred with tears of reunion, now reflected a mix of anger and relief. James explained how it had all begun. He had noticed changes in Nicole, a 32-year-old black woman with light brown skin and long wavy hair, when she started taking unusual interest in things. His father's legal documents, conversations about inheritance, suspicious searches on her phone. One night he caught messages that confirmed her intentions. From that moment he knew he had to act before it was too late. The young man described the moment he got into the sabotaged car, the strange sound of the engine, the unusual behavior of the brakes. Everything gave away the tampering. With a steady mind, he quickly got out of the vehicle, left personal belongings inside, and set it ablaze so they would believe in his death. It was the only way he could escape alive and buy time. Thomas could hardly believe the cold resolve needed for such a decision. On one hand, he felt pride in his son's intelligence. On the other, immense anguish at the thought of the risk he had taken. His father's heart, though grateful for the miracle of seeing him alive, broke at the idea that James had to face the terror of death to survive. With a firm gaze, James said he couldn't return home immediately. He needed to be sure Nicole hadn't discovered he was alive. She was cunning, manipulative, and wouldn't hesitate to go further to achieve her goal. The fake pregnancy was just another piece in a cruel game to seize the $10 million that belonged to the family. The silence in the room grew heavy, as though the walls themselves absorbed the weight of the revelation. Thomas felt his struggle had shifted. It was no longer about grief, but about survival. He looked at his son and saw not just James, but the truth embodied before him, demanding justice. Through restrained tears, Thomas held his son's hand. That gesture carried both love and a promise. He knew from then on they could not act out of emotion. It was time for caution, strategy, and strength. Nicole had shown what she was capable of, and she would not rest until she got what she wanted. That moment, father and son realized they could no longer run from the truth. The accident had been only the tip of the iceberg. What still lay hidden behind Nicole's actions was a dark enigma about to be uncovered. Thomas could barely resist the urge to go straight to the police. His heart cried out for immediate justice, but James, a 27-year-old black man with dark brown skin, athletic build, short hair, and a thin beard, grabbed his arm firmly. "Dad, we don't have enough evidence," he said, his eyes serious and weary. It was true, without concrete proof, their words would be nothing more than empty accusations against Nicole. The old father took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within. The pain of betrayal and the anger he felt had to give way to prudence. James knew that Nicole, a 32-year-old black woman with light brown skin, long wavy hair, a calculated smile, and manipulative behavior, would not hesitate to turn the game against them if she sensed any rash moves. With every misstep, the risk of losing everything grew. That's when they decided to turn to an ally. They sought a trusted lawyer, someone who knew the family's history and could investigate without drawing suspicion. This discreet and shrewd professional became the centerpiece of the plan of caution. While Nicole believed she had control of the situation, Thomas and James were silently weaving the net that would trap her. The lawyer's office became the stage for long discussions. Mind maps, notes, and hypotheses were debated like moves on a chessboard. Thomas, with his life experience, brought prudence. James, with his youth and recent brush with danger, brought valuable details. Every word exchanged was a piece carefully positioned to disarm Nicole at the right moment. Meanwhile, Nicole continued her performance. Always well-dressed, she displayed her supposed pregnancy as if it were undeniable proof of her bond with James. But her eyes, sometimes sweet, sometimes calculating, betrayed the facade. What she didn't know was that, behind the scenes, the net was slowly closing in. Thomas lived torn between the instinct for immediate protection and the need for patience. It was like holding the reins of a wild horse. Any misstep could lead to disaster. At his side, James showed a newfound maturity, the result of the trials he had endured. Father and son, once divided by conflict, were now united by a common goal. The strategy demanded absolute silence. Not a word could slip to the neighbors. Not a gesture could arouse suspicion. Secrecy became both shield and sword. Each night, Thomas sat in his armchair, reflecting on the dangerous path they had chosen. But deep inside, he knew there was no other option. Caution was their only chance of victory. The lawyer, meanwhile, began to gather information discreetly. Old conversations, legal records, financial movements. Everything was examined with precision. Small details, once overlooked, revealed themselves as pieces of a complex puzzle. Each piece fit, bringing them closer to the truth that could bring Nicole down. And so, in the darkness of uncertainty, a thread of hope grew stronger. They knew they were not yet strong enough to face Nicole head-on, but they were preparing the ground. The plan of caution was not just a defense. It was the beginning of a silent counterattack, one that would soon reveal itself at the exact right moment. The trusted lawyer, armed with patience and precision, began connecting pieces that once seemed scattered. He discovered that Nicole had been researching inheritance in online forums, probing into details of the million-dollar compensation, and even investigating legal documents tied to Thomas's case. What once looked like coincidence now stood as evidence of a cold, well-crafted scheme. Thomas felt his anger grow with each revelation. It was no longer just intuition. There was proof that Nicole had orchestrated every step. The accident, the supposed pregnancy, the attacks against him, all were part of a plan to steal the $10 million from the Cooper family. The old father's heart beat with a mix of outrage and determination. On a rainy afternoon, Nicole appeared once again at his door. Her elegant clothes were damp, but her posture remained defiant. She pounded on the door, and when Thomas opened, she stormed in with sharp words, demanding immediate payment, declaring no lawyer could stop her. Her voice thundered through the heavy silence of the house. Thomas remained calm. His deep gaze showed no fear, only resolve. He told her the accident was under investigation and that authorities were already gathering evidence. At that, Nicole's face changed instantly. Her eyes widened, her breath quickened. The mask of confidence began to crack, replaced by the nervousness of someone who feels the net closing in. She tried to fight back with more shouting, hurling cruel insults at Thomas. She called him a useless old man, accused him of failing to protect his own son, and even mocked the grief he carried. But in the heat of her frenzy, she let slip what she never should have. She confessed aloud to having planned the accident, daring her father-in-law to prove it. The weight of that confession was crushing. Thomas, though prepared for provocation, felt the sting of those words like a blade. The certainty of betrayal now had its own voice, and Nicole's mask had finally fallen. Her uncontrolled rage revealed more than 1,000 documents ever could. The next minutes dragged on like centuries. Nicole, agitated, paced back and forth across the room, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of control. But her own words had dug the trap she could not escape. The air grew heavy, and the house became a stage for revelation and downfall. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, as if nature itself wished to bear witness to the confrontation's climax. Thomas kept his eyes locked on her, knowing the truth had finally surfaced. It was the moment he had long awaited, but also the beginning of an even greater upheaval. And in the very instant when Nicole, consumed by rage, demanded, "But what proof do you have against me?" another voice would rise in the room, firm and undeniable, shifting the course of that night forever. At the very moment, Nicole, a 32-year-old black woman with light brown skin, long wavy hair, a red dress, and eyes burning with fury, shouted defiantly, "Yes, I planned the accident, so what? But tell me, what proof do you have against me?" A firm voice echoed from the doorway. "I am the proof." James, a 27-year-old black man with dark brown skin, an athletic build, short hair, and a thin beard, stepped forward slowly, holding in his hand a cell phone that had recorded the entire conversation. The shock was immediate. Nicole's face turned pale. Her knees nearly gave out, and her arrogant expression twisted into pure despair. Her lips trembled as she muttered in disbelief, How are you alive?" The silence that followed was broken only by the pounding, rain against the windows, as if nature itself wanted to bear witness to that moment of revelation. James, his eyes glistening with both pain and anger, stared directly at her. "I'm alive, and now you will pay for what you've done," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. The cell phone in his hand captured every second, sealing Nicole's fate. At the same time, he revealed that he had already called the police minutes earlier, ensuring that her own words were recorded at just the right moment. Nicole realized she was cornered. In a desperate attempt, she tried to run toward the street, but was caught off guard by the flashing red and blue lights, flooding into the room. Police cars had pulled up in front of the house, their headlights illuminating her trembling silhouette. Officers stormed in with weapons drawn, shouting clear commands that echoed through the charged atmosphere. She resisted, screaming and cursing, but was quickly restrained and handcuffed. Her body thrashed, yet her struggle was futile. Beyond James's recording, the prior call to the police had already alerted authorities, who arrived just in time to witness the final act. The very words Nicole had spoken moments before became chains heavier than any set of cuffs. Thomas, a 67-year-old black man with dark skin, short gray hair, and a neatly trimmed white beard, watched in silence, tears streaming down his lined face. His heart, crushed for so long by grief, now found relief. Not only because the threat was finally over, but because of the miracle of having James alive by his side. The old father opened his arms and pulled his son into a tight embrace, as if trying to make up for every lost second. James allowed himself to be enveloped, once more feeling the strength and protection only his father could offer. Their bond, once fractured by choices and Nicole's manipulations, was now sealed with even greater intensity. Outside, neighbors peeked discreetly through their curtains, curious about the flashing police lights. Inside the house, however, what unfolded was deeper than any spectacle. The triumph of truth over lies, of justice over betrayal. And so, with Nicole taken away, by the authorities and father and son reunited, the long night of pain and uncertainty finally seemed to come to an end. Yet deep within, Thomas remained the awareness that wounds so profound never disappear all at once. They linger as silent scars, reminders that truth always demands courage to surface. Now that you've walked through every detail of this story, the question remains, if you were in Thomas's place, would you have had the cold blood to act with caution, or would you have been carried away by emotion? How many times in your own life have you been deceived by well-rehearsed words without noticing the manipulation hidden behind them? This tale isn't just about inheritance, but about the courage to face painful truths and the importance of never lowering your guard when everything seems lost. And I want to know, what would you have done in his place? Share your opinion in the comments. Your perspective might open other people's eyes. And of course, if this story kept you hooked until the end, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. That way, you'll keep following intense stories like this one and won't miss any of the upcoming content that will surprise you even more.